Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the ISM New Jersey webinar series. I'm so glad you're able to join us. We do have an estimated crowd of about 50 attendees today, so we will have a great group of people on the webinar today. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation for our speaker, please use the question bar, or you can also use the chat bar. And at that time, at the end, after he completes the presentation, we can then address all your questions. But please make sure you put some questions in there for our speaker today. I would like to, at this time, start the presentation. We are going to be speaking about generation gaps, a very important topic in today's world. And our speaker today is a dear friend. His name is Matt Bradshaw. He's with Bradshaw Consulting Group, and he's also with ISM Houston, one of our chapter friends. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Matt, and he's going to be presenting, and he'll give you a little information on his background as well. So introduce to you, Matt. Take it over.
Hi. I'm glad that you all were able to join me this afternoon. And just a little bit about me. My background has been in supply chain management, and I've been in it for a long time. I also have been a senior buyer and so forth, and I have my own business now at this point. So let's get started. So welcome to the Generation Gaps webinar. The workplace can present challenges to management in terms of handling the different generations present. As older workers delay retiring and younger workers are entering the workforce, the work environment has become a patchwork of varying perspectives and experiences, all valuable to say the least. While having various cultures in one workplace can present communication problems and conflicts, the benefits of such a variety in the workplace outweigh it. Both the young and the older workers has many ideas to offer which can help the organization thrive in the work marketplace. Learning how to deal with the generation gap at work will help you to become a better manager or coworker. This workshop will help you understand the various generations present at work and understand motives, what motivates them, and how to deal with them on a daily basis. So our objective today is that research has consistently demonstrated that when clear goals are associated with learning, it occurs more easily and rapidly. With that in mind, let's review our goals for the day. At the end of this webinar, participants should be able to understand the history behind generation gaps, know what traditionalists are, baby boomers are, Generation Xers are, Generation Yers are, and Generation Zers are. Understand the differences between each type of generation, find common ground among the generations, understand conflict management, and learn more about leveraging the benefits of generation gaps at work. Next slide, 4. I'm going to let her catch up a little bit. So slide 4, Kathy, is on history. Okay. The term generation gap is a term used to describe the different values and attitudes between one generation and another. This term is typically used to describe the gap between parents and their children. Since the 1960s, the term generation gap has also been used to describe the clash one age group has with another in various settings. The workplace is such an environment where different generations must intermingle and deal with each other's way of thinking. This section will discuss the following topics as it relates to the generation gap in the workplace. So what generations exist in the workplace, what defines a generation, what this means in our workplace. Let's begin by understanding what generations exist in the workplace. Next slide. Today's workplace presents many challenges that are based solely on meeting goals, but business objectives and project deadlines. Threaded throughout the normal business activities are dynamics that could present issues and conflicts if left unchecked. Since many older workers remain on the job longer and younger workers are entering the workplace right out of college, the work environment is fragmented into various generations. In order to understand this eclectic environment, it's necessary to understand what generations are present in today's workplace. Because humans live on an average of 77 to 80 years, 4 potential generations, actually it's 5 now, may exist in the workplace today. The 5 generations that could be present are the following: traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, and Generation Z. Understanding the backgrounds, attitudes, and work styles of each generation is essential for a manager or supervisor. If they want to effectively coach and communicate, then understanding these differences is paramount in creating a respectful and peaceful work environment for all employees. This webinar will help you learn the characteristics of each of the 5 generations and how to deal with their uniqueness. Before we get into the details of each of the 5 generations, we're going to learn what defines a generation. Next slide. A generation is a group of people born during the same period and shares the same attitudes and values. Period is the factor to dividing the generations into groups. The 5 generations mentioned in the previous section have time ranges that define their period. For example, the traditionalist generation represents people in a generation born before 1946. The baby boomers are people born between 1946 and 1961, and Generation X represents people born between 1962 and 1980, and Generation Y represents people born in the 1980s and 1990s. Generation Z represents people born between 1995 and 2010. And each period are experiences that shape the attitudes and values of each generation. In addition, the interaction between generations is also a factor in shaping the subsequent generation. For example, Generation X sought to be different by the larger, more influential baby boomers. This thinking affects their behaviors and preferences. Now, I'm going to pause just for a minute here because I'd like for Kathy to put up a poll and just to see what generation you're falling into. That'll be helpful. So if you would do that, I'd appreciate it. So far, we have about 29 people online with us. And the largest group at this point that I see is Generation X, which is 60% of the people online at this point that have submitted their vote. It's interesting that there's only one millennial on. That's kind of interesting. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and close the poll for now, Kathy, and we'll go to the next slide. When groups have the same values and attitudes, communication and other dynamics typically go smoother. When there are multiple groups and each group brings their own style, values, and attitudes, this could create tension and other issues if not paying attention. Multiple generations in the workplace present challenges in many areas. Let's review 2 perspectives that must be managed. First is the employee-to-employee perspective is critical. It shows how different generations interacting with each other may lead to miscommunication or misunderstanding. Furthermore, the way each generation handles confrontation may also be a point of friction. The generation gap between employees could be seen more in the modes of communication, the words, and the gestures used. And the manager-to-manager employee perspective is another sensitive area. Generation gaps in this situation could be difficult if the relationship starts on the wrong foot. For the manager, knowing that there are differences in the way that generations communicate, view authority, life-work balance, and relationships is just the beginning. The manager must also plan how to address these issues proactively, avoiding difficult or tense situations. Having difficult situations at work could lead to poor morale and productivity, which will reflect on the manager's performance. Generation gaps at work mean more work is needed to cultivate an environment that respects each other's generation perspective and way of life. This also means that the manager must be observant and knowledgeable of these various traits associated with each generation. So over the next 5 parts, we're going to learn about each of the 5 generations in detail. So we'll begin with the traditionalists first. Next slide. In this part, you will learn the traits and behavior of the traditionalist generation. This generation is probably the oldest generation you may encounter at work. The members of this generation were born before 1946. You're going to learn the following about this generation: their background, their character, and their working style. So let's look at the background on the traditionalists to begin this section. Next slide. Being born before 1946 is what classifies a traditionalist. Their background touched on dealing with some incredible social issues. For example, traditionalists may have experienced the Great Depression, World War I, and World War II. The military influenced their way of life, since war was a great part of their cultural event, and many served during this era. The traditionalists were brought up during tough times, where scarcity of resources was caused by economic troubles and war. Since the country was in a military and social program mode, individuality was not celebrated. The culture saw a uniform thought pattern which was brought on by rallying against a visible foe. Traditional values in terms of family structure and gender roles influenced the workplace during this generation. Men mostly dominated the workplace. In essence, the traditionalists had to work hard and see that as a way of life. Okay, next slide is characters. Traditionalists are considered hardworking because they grew up during when jobs were not abundant. They were willing to put in long hours and believe that hard work is the way you earn a better position in the company. Traditionalists are loyal to their employees and tend not to move from employer to employer. They stay where they are if possible. Further, traditionalists are submissive because they were taught to respect authority. Traditionalists will avoid causing trouble and are good team players. They're least likely to initiate conflict at work. There are also a tendency to resist change. They value safety, security, consistency, and commitment. Now we'll go to the next slide. Today, traditionalists comprise of about 5% of the working population. Most traditionalists are retired. Nonetheless, traditionalists bring a strong work ethic to the job place. They're dedicated to their employers and value leadership and hierarchy. Characteristics. Traditionalists like to be recognized for their work. Traditionalists also see work as a team effort and avoid conflict. And this group is also technically challenged, and they may struggle to learn new technology. They also prefer lecture-style training over web-based. Since traditionalists are near retirement, their zeal for working their way to the top may be less than other generations. They tend to be satisfied with their life situation and do not see advancement or achievement as important as younger generations. Motivating traditional employee may be a challenge because of their tenure at work and lack of desire to prove something. They'll usually conform and strive to keep the status quo. Next slide. So now we're going to go to the baby boomers. In this part, you'll learn the traits and behaviors of the baby boomer generation. This generation has members that were born between 1946 and 1964. First thing we're going to learn is the baby boomers' background. Let's begin. Baby boomers were the product of post-war efforts to absorb soldiers returning from home from battle. The government passed the GI Bill of Rights in 1944, which gave soldiers a means to obtain a home, job, and start a family. The result was a boom in childbirth, which is where the title baby boomers derived. Baby boomers grew up in an era of prosperity and growth in the United States. Baby boomers grew up mostly in suburbs and experienced a similar experience in education and upbringing. Baby boomers grew up in the years of innocence during the 1950s and seen model lives portrayed on television. Television was a large component of the baby boomers' upbringing. As mothers began working outside the home, baby boomers grew up more and more with television. As the baby boomers moved through the 1960s, their generation was becoming more defined. The 1960s brought about social change, like civil rights, a different kind of war in Vietnam, and rebellion against established institutions like the hippie revolution. The baby boomers generation represents a departure from the traditional and movements toward changes in society, beliefs, and attitudes. Next slide. Baby boomers are known to be confident and independent. Should be on their character slide, Kathy. Thank you. Baby boomers are known to be confident and independent. They were exposed to a changing world where challenging the established culture was normal. Baby boomers are willing to confront others, and they will challenge the status quo. Baby boomers are well educated and are exposed to more financial resources than the past generation. Baby boomers are hard working and define themselves by their careers and professions. Baby boomers are disciplined and they mirror some of their parents' work ethics. Since baby boomers know they make up most of the working population, they tend to have more of their generation connect with work, making it more difficult for non-baby boomers to affect the organization. On the other hand, baby boomers support change and will advocate for it if they see it being a benefit. Next slide. Baby boomers are work-centric. They're hardworking and they're motivated by incentives. Baby boomers tend to work long work weeks. They tend to be workaholics and think that everybody should do the same in order to advance their careers. So here are the characteristics. Baby boomers are career-focused and enjoy achieving at work. They like doing complicated work that makes a difference. Baby boomers are very competitive and they equate their worth by their status and position at work. Baby boomers are resourceful and look for different ways to win. Baby boomers do prefer a hierarchical work structure and may find it difficult to work in a flexible environment. Finally, baby boomers tend to favor face-to-face interaction instead of remote means like emails, texts, etc. Slide 16. This part discusses the traits and behaviors of Generation X. This segment of culture was born between the mid-1960s and the mid to late 1970s. You're going to learn the following about them: the Gen X background, the Gen X character, the Gen X working style. Let's begin this section with understanding the Generation Xers' background. Slide 17. Gen Xers were born between 1965 and 1980. They are the generation right after the decline of the baby boom of the post-war era. Generation Xers lived during a time when the country shifted from manufacturing to servicing. This generation grew up with technology as part of their lives. They experienced computers, video games, cell phones, email, etc. They've seen the evolution of technology and understand its origins. Generation Xers experienced difficult times in the 1980s and learned to live in tough times. And finally, Generation Xers were raised in two-income homes or single-parent homes. These situations forced many Gen Xers to be placed in daycare. Their background allowed them to develop new characteristics that went against the baby boomers. Their characteristics is on the next slide. Generation Xers are individualistic people and independent. They're self-sufficient, flexible. This character trait enables them to change jobs more frequently than the previous generations. They usually see this as a way of moving up the corporate ladder. This generation is more ethnically diverse and is better educated over the previous generation. More than half Generation Xers attended college. Generation Xers also believe in more balance between their work and home life than the previous generation. They rather focus on family than work and value jobs that allow flexibility in their schedules to meet the demands of their family. Generation Xers are more willing to try new things because of their technical experience, and they welcome new technology into their lives easily and adapt to them quickly. Generation Xers are also tolerant of other lifestyles and accept this as part of the change in their environment. Generation Xers' perspective allow them to foster a more accepting environment at work. Slide 19. Generation Xers enjoy freedom at work. They crave responsibility and politely reject authority and fixed work schedules. This generation does not do well in a micromanaged environment. They will thrive in a workplace where management allows them to complete their task without too much supervision. Generation Xers will be the first ones to take advantage of technology and incorporate it into their work. They see technology as a tool and a way to do things more efficiently. Generation Xers will look for other employment opportunities if it promises advancements of their career. They are less committed to their employers than baby boomers. On the other hand, Generation Xers adapt well to change in their workplace, and they are key drivers of change. Finally, this generation believes in a healthy balance between work and their personal life. They also like to have fun at work and believes in a work and play hard ideal. Generation Xers like a dynamic work environment that challenges them, yet support their needs for fun and a balance between work and home life. Slide 20. If you're going to learn about Generation Y, you're going to learn about that in this slide, this section, or the millennial generation in this part. This group was born between 1979 and 1994. This part will teach you the background, characters, and working style of the Generation Y. Let's see what Gen Y is. Next slide. Generation Yers are those born between mid to 1970s through 1990s. Generation Y group had technology as a normal part of life and do not know what it is to be without a computer, cell phone, or any other electronic device. The older generation had to adapt to their lives. This generation can thrive on electronic communication and prefer that than face-to-face conversation. Generation Y prefers using the internet as means of learning and making purchases. They're exposed to vast amounts of information, music, and media than older generations. This generation was exposed to more group interactions through playgroups, team sports, and other group activities than the previous generation. This was due in part to their parents' higher education and success. Finally, this generation is used to getting what they want and when they want it. The speed of technology and the information coupled with rapid delivery systems has made this generation expect things to be done faster and better. Slide 22. Characteristics. Generation Y is prone to communicating via electronic devices and is capable of multitasking while carrying a text messaging conversation. This generation relies on technology to do their jobs and expect to have resources available to them when they're at work. Generation Y is family-centric and value family over work. This generation looks for flexible schedules at work and balance between work and life. They're willing to take less pay for this benefit. This generation is achievement-oriented and is confident. Generation Y questions authority without fear and challenge ideas and motives. Generation Y enjoys meaningful work and are ready to keep on learning new ideas and things. Generation Y works well in a team environment. They seek positive reinforcement from others and believe no one should be left behind. They rather slow the process down in order to give a teammate the opportunity to catch up. And finally, the Generation Y group appreciates feedback and being kept updated on their latest developments. They do require periodic recognition and praise for their work. Next slide. Generation Y's working style is vastly different from those of the previous generation. This generation is motivated by benefits that give them the ability to have flexible schedules. They are less motivated monetarily. They're not happy with long working hours, and this may send the message that they do not care about their work or are lacking discipline. Families first, Generation Y, and they will push back on work that crosses this boundary. This generation does expect a lot from their employer in terms of new challenges and the opportunity to achieve things. Generation Y does see promotions and climbing the corporate ladder as a way to demonstrate their worth. Generation Y is loyal to their employer and seeks to be included in important activities at work. They will call attention to themselves by suggesting bold ideas and challenging the status quo. However, they do become concerned with what others think about them and need affirmation every so often. Since this generation is relatively young in the workplace, there is a need for mentoring. They see this as a normal and expect it from their leaders. They like guidance and development when it comes to their careers. Okay. Next slide. Their working style. Let me get back to the right slide here. Generation Z. Should be slide 24. We have covered traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, and Generation Y. It's time that we examine the Generation Z category. This group of people make up a little over a quarter of the U.S. population and are generally thought of as being all those born from 1995 to 2010. Like the previous generations that we have discussed, Generation Z also has its own personality in its background, the group characteristics, and working style. So let's take a look at Generation Z on the next slide. If millennials reach adulthood around the year 2000, Generation Z population would be considered post-millennials. Generation Z is just entering the workforce. The post-millennials contribute to over 44 million to the American economy and will soon make up a third of the U.S. population. These all make good reasons to learn more about this generation of population. Also known as the Centennials, most ethnically diverse generation of Americans, grew up with the internet, smartphones, and social media, mirrors Generation Y in their political and social issues, will soon contribute to the most money to the American economy. Slide 26, character. The Generation Z population has its own characteristics and traits. Global, although this generation may be completely immersed in their digital devices, they are still, by far, the most globally aware generation as of yet. More informed due to their technology use, they're more in tune with the world around them. High expectations. The Centennials generally have very high standards for where and what they spend their time and money. If a product is not delivered fast enough or at the quality they're expecting, this generation will change the suppliers immediately. Just my interjection, that might be a mistake. At any rate, they're self-starters. Generation Z research is showing a higher rate of business startups. Many of this group of people is choosing not to continue their education, but also start their own businesses before graduation. Striving for uniqueness. This generation has had an internet presence from a very early age. With many social media accounts to choose from, these adults are striving to stand out from the crowd and be recognized. Working style on slide 27. Generation Z workers are showing signs of being less focused, with shorter attention spans when compared to those of their predecessors. This age group was raised with instant gratification from the use of new technologies that deliver nearly real-time results. They are, however, wonderful multitaskers, having been raised completing many tasks at the same time, using many different gadgets and other technologies. For example, talking on speakerphone while posting a YouTube video and while ordering groceries via Alexa. When compared to the previous generations, the Centennials are more likely to be in school and less likely to be in the workforce, many times living at home. This generation often chooses to focus on furthering their education due to this group's need for individuality and credit for their accomplishments. When they enter the workplace, they are often very strong individual workers. Most are very flexible, very independent workers that are self-starters. Next slide is on attitude. Attitudes among the generations are different. This has to do with their background and the way that each generation interacts with other human beings during their time. So attitude toward authority. As the generations progress, their attitude toward authority is one that will challenge them. Older generations was taught to revere authority due to the military presence in the culture during wartime. As the decades passed, the generations rebelled and eventually created an attitude of challenging the status quo in the younger generation. Attitude towards others. Let me get back on the right slide here. Okay. Attitudes toward individuality. The younger generations were brought up during a time where most parents worked outside the home, leaving them in daycare. This environment taught the younger generation to be independent and self-sufficient. The older generation seeks to work with groups and think of others over themselves. Loyalty to their employers. The older generation is more likely to stay with one employer their entire life, if that's possible. This tendency was brought on by living through difficult times. Older generations believe that devoting themselves to their jobs will bring rewards. The younger generations are not as loyal. They see changing employers, as opportunities to advance their careers by themselves. Again, this is an individualistic perspective of the younger generation. Slide 29 on working style. As we learn about the background and attitudes of generations, we see a pattern that moves the focus from group to individual perspective. This is true of working styles between the older and younger generations. Flexible hours. The younger generation values flexibility in the workday to attend to personal things. They value their family life over their work life and seek to find employers that will provide working arrangements that will allow them to work and manage their family life. The older generation values hard work and see a clear separation of work and their family life. They value their jobs and see the work hours as a part of a fixed day. Life experience, slide 30. Life experience is another area where the generations vary. These activities represent unique experience for that generation. So hard times. The older generation experienced harder times, and lived without for long periods. This taught them to value of having basics like food and clothes. Baby boomers know that what it is to fight for civil rights and protest against government. The younger generations did see economic hard times, but were sheltered by their parents, diminishing the effects. Entertainment. The older generation experienced entertainment as traditional events like the movies, non-technical activities. The younger generation grew up with video games, 4D rides at amusement parks, and other activities that are designed to stir their senses. Reading books and doing manual things are appreciated by the older generation, but may be seen as boring activities for the younger generation. Technology. The younger generation experienced technology as a way of life. Generation X had technology grow into their lives, and Generation Y never did without it. The older generation was slow to adapt and use technology as a social tool. The advent of social networks and electronic communications gave the younger generation exposure to more detailed information about each other than the older generation. Slide 31, finding common ground. In order to be successful bridging the gap across the generations, you must find common ground that enables you to close the gap and effectively reach your opposing generation. In this part, you'll learn the following: adopting a communication style, creating an affinity group, and sharing knowledge. Let's see how adopting a communication style helps you find common ground. Slide 32. Being sensitive to the way you communicate will help you bridge the generation gap at work. Understanding that older generations prefer face-to-face communication and the younger prefer electronic methods should give you a basis to form a flexible communication style that reaches all generations at work. Here is an easy way to adopt your communication style. Use the TAP method for communicating. You will have to think a little before you communicate to someone, but the investment's well worth it. TAP stands for the following components: to the point. Make your communication brief and succinct. The older generation will appreciate the clarity, and the younger generation will appreciate the brevity. Adapt. Change the method of communication for your audience. If you're going to engage an older worker, make the effort to either call them or, better yet, see them in person. They will feel respected and valued. For the younger generation, use email or instant messaging, etc. to reach them. They'll feel independent and not micromanaged. If you need to address the entire group, younger and older, in an email, make yourself available for follow-up by telling the group to reply, call, or see you in person if they have a question. Professional. When in doubt, communicate professionally. Avoid jargon and text abbreviations in your communication. Use salutations and close your communication properly. You'll show the older generation that you respect them and set the example for the younger generation on how to communicate professionally. Slide 33, creating an affinity group. Affinity groups are groups of people sharing common interests. You can create such groups at work that give different generations a chance to work with each other with an activity which is not directly work-related. These groups provide a way for the generations to learn more about each other's interests and values. You can create several affinity groups, promoting cohesion among the various generations. Affinity groups are usually non-hierarchical. They're typically small and do not require centralization. Affinity groups could tend to become closed. That's why allowing groups that focus on non-polarized topics are the best way to introduce affinity groups in your workplace. So here's some groups to consider: work newsletter group, professional book club, recycling task force, community service group, improving work morale group, work safety group, speech club group. Slide 34, sharing knowledge. The lack of knowledge could breed fear between generations or lead to misinterpretation. Sharing knowledge helps to break down barriers and create an understanding and collaborative environment. There are many ways knowledge can be shared. Here are some of the ways to share knowledge at work. You can set up a blog where a topic is introduced and then a team can submit comments. Blogs provide a safe and open structure to hold discussions. If you use a blog, be sure to set up clear rules of what and how to share. You want to avoid sensitive topics for discussion. This can undermine the sharing process. Form focus groups to resolve an issue or generate new ideas. Focus groups containing various generations is a great way to get different perspectives from your diverse work group. Read up on how to facilitate meetings so that you can better manage the dynamics in such a meeting. Create a newsletter where employees get to share their thoughts in an interview. This can be a creative way of sharing knowledge. And place an ideas box where employees can submit ideas for review by your team. This can be a real box or an electronic version of via email or other form of communication. Next slide is on conflict management. Conflict is normal in the workplace, but it could happen more often between two people of opposing generations. Understanding how to manage conflict across the generations will help to reduce the confrontation and perhaps avoid them in the future. This section will teach you the following: younger bosses managing older workers, avoid turnover with retention plan, and breaking down the stereotypes. So let's begin with our first topic of younger bosses managing older workers on the next slide. Managing older employees could be a source for conflict. Older employees may feel they should be in charge or that you lack experience. The key to avoiding conflict with an older employee is to demonstrate respect and showing them that they are valued. So use the ACE technique in avoiding conflict with your older employees. ACE stands for the following process. Acknowledge your older employees' experience and the value that they bring to the team. Older employees may feel as if they're no longer valuable because of their age. Show them that you value them by reflecting on their achievements and contribution to the team. Caring for your older employee comes in many ways. Become interested in their personal life or hobbies. Take note of special things that took place in their lives. Show interest in their family and listen to them when they talk and mirror back what they have said to show that you are listening. Exchange ideas and ask for input from your older employees on issues and demonstrate that you value their opinions and solutions. Implement good ideas and give them recognition. When you implement their ideas, your older employee will be more willing to take in your ideas. Create a give and take environment between you and your older employees. Slide 37 is avoiding turnover with a retention plan. Avoiding turnover is easier when you're prepared. If you let turnover surprise you, then you're not paying attention to your environment. Whenever you're speaking with your employees, always attempt to gauge their level of engagement with their job and try to determine any issues before it's too late. A retention plan should be made for each of your employees. You can make it as specific or general based on your needs. Here are some things to consider when creating a retention plan for your employees based on generational traits. Determine what values this person has based on their generational trait. Think of things that could be a motivating factor like schedule flexibility, incentives, and recognition. Prepare several focused questions that may lead to underlying issues. For example, you may ask a question about the reasons why they are dissatisfied with their job. Be frank with your employees and tell them that you want to keep them and will set up a follow-up meeting to discuss possible solutions. Ask questions about their personal goals and career milestones and see how you can help them achieve them. Be ready to become an advocate for your employee. This means that you may need to do some research or speak with key people in human resources to find more solutions. Work with your human resource contact to develop a retirement plan. They can give you solutions that are aligned with your company's policies. Slide 38, breaking down the stereotypes. Stereotypes are formed when there is a lack of information from the other side. Stereotypes are difficult to break because the thought process is difficult to detect. The best way to address stereotypes is to get your team involved in activities that help build the team and places them in a situation that challenges all participants. For example, you can have your team take on a project that your team never has done before. Perhaps you can engage your team with a friendly competition with another group of the department where the focus is on them and on that team. Many activities can challenge your team. When your team is challenged, their best traits will come through. You may encounter resistance at first, but your job is to coach them through it. Once you're done with your activity, hold a debrief meeting to spotlight the team and their achievements. Share commonalities that span the entire team. Finally, relate those commonalities to work-related activities like project, work, etc. Next slide is on conflict management. This part continues on the topic of conflict management across the generations. You'll learn the following over the next few sections. Embrace hot zones, treat each other as a peer, create a succession plan. So let's learn what the hot zone is and how to embrace it on the next slide. When dealing with generation gap issues, there is a hot zone that you must recognize and address. The hot zone is an area where you know there is conflict. It could be between two employees or groups within your team. Take a moment and jot down some of those ideas. First, you must acknowledge the hot zone exists. Ignoring it could result to more widespread hot zones. And next, you should engage the hot zone as soon as possible and provide feedback to all the parties involved. Set expectations with your employees on how to handle future conflict. And hold one-on-one coaching with each employee involved in the hot zone and have him or her come up with ideas on how to make things better, avoiding hot zone issues. Slide 41, treat each other as a peer. Treating each other as a peer requires some key behaviors that demonstrate this characteristic. It's not enough to tell your employees to treat each other as peers. They need a guideline and coaching in order to achieve this. The CARE model is a good way to start this process, and they should be coached at the individual level. CARE stands for the following behaviors. Collaborate. Your team should be exposed to an environment where ideas are exchanged and at times challenged. Set ground rules in your meetings on how to handle disagreements. Encourage other points of view. Make sure all of the participants are involved. Be fair in your assessment and use objective means to determine the best ideas. Acknowledge, teach your team to acknowledge each other's values. In addition, teach them how to deliver the feedback. Don't assume that they know how to do this. Remember that feedback is behavior-based. Respect. Teach your team how to show respect to each other by using proper greetings and posture towards each other. Set expectation that derogatory remarks about age are not tolerated by anyone. Equal. Teach your team that all members of the team are equal in value and contribution that they bring. Age is not a factor. 42. Create a succession plan. A succession plan is a map of career path for your employee. When you create a succession plan, you give that employee something to focus on in terms of career goal. When they're focused on a plan, they will be less susceptible to conflict because they're doing what it takes to achieve the goals of this plan. Building a succession plan takes time. It requires you to know the personal goals of the employee and their gaps. You also have to be committed to their succession plan. If you do not show commitment, your employee will disengage and may become frustrated and confrontational. Here are some tips to creating a succession plan. Determine a clear career goal. Make sure it's a real goal. Make sure it's attainable. And make sure it's time-driven. Consult with your human resources department to determine what their requirements are. Consult with the head of the department if the career path takes them to another area. Determine any educational requirements and provide guidance. Set up a mentor program with someone currently doing what they want to achieve. Track their progress and then meet with them periodically to specifically discuss their progress on their succession plan. The next slide is wrapping it up. Although this workshop is coming to a close, we hope that your journey to improve your generation gap skills is just beginning. Please take a moment to review and update your action plan. This will be a key tool to guide your progress in the days, weeks, and months and years to come. We wish you the best of luck on the rest of your travels. One other thing I'm going to recommend to you is to read or listen to this book. It's called The Clash of the Generations, Managing the New Workplace, Reality by Valerie M. Grubb. So you can get that on at your bookstore or online, or listen to it on Amazon, or read it on your Kindle, whichever. And I'm sure Barnes & Noble has the same thing. And finally, the last slide, words from the wise. Marcus Tullius Cicero. What nobler employment or more valuable to the state than that of the man who instructs the rising generation? F. Scott Fitzgerald said, my idea is always to reach my generation. The wise writer writes for the youth of his own generation, the critics of the next, and the schoolmasters of ever after. Word. Charles M. Schultz says, if you were given the opportunity to present a gift to the next generation, it would be the ability for each individual to learn and to laugh at himself. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and that's all I have at this point. Kathy, is there any notes?
Yeah, we do have some. Yeah, we have some questions here. Some questions came in while you were presenting. We have one that says, how do you see the current epidemic affecting the workplace. I'm not sure if it's epidemic or epidemic,
Yeah,
affecting the
epidemic.
workplace and the balance of the generational gap.
I think it's going to be the same. We're going to see some changes just because of people working with one another and so forth. It's really too soon to, I think, put a specific point of view on that, because we'll see more after this is over with. And when this is over with, we don't know yet. It's still going on. And the next question I see on here is, what's the best way for groups to work together for the best of the business to get over the differences? I think the best way is to make sure you communicate with one another, okay? And you will be getting the notes and everything from today, the slide deck and so forth. But just think about what we said a little later on in the presentation, that we'll just have to communicate, work with one another, and learn about the communication between different generational groups and how they interact. Because I know that can be a major problem. At least I've seen it in my workplaces in the past, and I'm sure you see it in your present workplace. And then there was another note where my daughter is born in 1995, believes she's a Gen Y, not a Gen Z. Well, she's still a millennial. It's just a post-millennial. So, it still has some of the same traits. Also, I'd like to say, if you have time, not just look at the generations, also look at the personalities of the individuals. Because each individual has a different personality. It's going to approach things from a different perspective. So communications also apply in your personality, not just because of your generation. And it says, my younger daughter was born in 1998 and said her sociology class in college said Gen Y last through 1996. Well, it's kind of flexible, I think. Okay? So it'll vary from each group that you read or each piece of paper you look at. Victor, what will be the next group after Gen Z? I have no idea. They'll pick something here. It should be coming up pretty close. I had some information on that. I'll see if I can find something else, get it sent to you, Victor, okay? I need to drop at 2:30 for a call, and I'll be interested in presenters commenting on the start and stop years for the different generations, okay?
Do you have time for two more questions?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen someone born between certain years that behaves like a different generation?
Absolutely. Again, that enters into the personality perspective. Everybody's going to be a little different just because of their own personality. And I really recommend that you look at the Myers-Briggs or one of the others that are out there. I have several books on personalities in the workplace and so on, and that'll give you an idea. And I can even send you a list of the different books that I would recommend on that. Okay, anything else?
Thank you so much. No, that's it. Last question was from Bonnie, but yes, you will get a copy of this, the presentation, as well as the recording. So I will be emailing everybody shortly as soon as we finish up off this webinar in like about 30 seconds. At this time, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And just a brief note, we will be having our next program is going to be on April 21st, and it's going to be on emotional intelligence. So if you're interested in that, you can go to our website and then you can register. Again, it's free for all ISM members. Thank you very much.
There's a lot of emotions going on right now, right? All right.
Exactly.
I think I'll be on that one.
Everybody.
All right. Have a great day.
Well, be safe.
Bye-bye.
Be safe, everybody, and we'll see you hopefully on the next program. Take care, everybody.